Well, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon in Amsterdam, and I guess we have an exciting session in front of us today. Trying to really give a good picture of what component-based media is from a user's perspective. And so I see a lot of familiar faces, but just a quick show of hand, who has never heard of component media before? Don't be shy. Or maybe I should ask the question the opposite way. Who has heard about component media? All right, okay, good. So the objective today is really to answer the question why component-based media and share with you some real-life experiences deploying it and implementing it. And I have with me 5 pretty exceptional speakers, and we'll introduce them as the show goes on. So let's see, do I have control here? There we go. So I'm Pierre-Anthony Lemieux, or as they like to say it in California, Pierre-Anthony Lemieux. And I'm the chairman of the IMF user group, which is the group that set up this panel. I'll be your MC. And the plan is to really start with a number of short presentations, really testimonials, about 8 minutes each, so that we really at the end have time for a good Q&A session, 45 minutes. So, and for questions, you'll be able to ask them using the IBC app, or of course raising your hand. Both are possible, and we're gonna live the 21st century, so that's good. So anyway, so without further ado, let's get started. And really, before delving really deep into component-based media, I thought it'd be useful to kind of step back a little bit and look back at some of the fundamental trends that's been driving and shaping the entertainment content for the past couple of years, and really it's been driving component-based media. And the first one of those trends is ever-expanding essence repertoire, right? Gone are the days of everybody just doing HD with 5.1 channels or SD with stereo. It's gone to be a much more complicated world. And there's UHD, there's HDR, there's wide color gamut. And by the way, there's 2 ways of doing HDR, and that's just for video. And now for audio, we have immersive sound, in addition to more traditional channel-based audio. And we have access services now, a range of them, right? From video signing to captions to audio description. And this is all fueled by really fundamentally digital media, right? Digital media makes it possible to deploy and author these new essence types pretty easily with a relatively low bar. And for every single type of hole, there's a screw. And that's not gonna change, right? Every single year, there'll be new kinds of essence. It's a very different world than just a couple of years ago. And similarly, there's many, many different viewing experiences, right? Gone are the days of the living room being the centerpiece of the audiovisual experience. People now experience movies, TV on their phone, right? In noisy environments, or sometimes, in fact, in environments that are quiet or should stay quiet, like late at night in bed. So that's also been a really fundamental shift, I think, in the past couple of years. So many, many different viewing experiences with very different characteristics. Also, something that's really been happening is the emergence of global content platforms, right? Gone are the days of creating content for a single territory in a single language. Now, platforms like Netflix, Apple, Amazon, and others have really made possible the distribution, or has certainly lowered the bar to distribution and acquisition worldwide of content. And that really what it means is now content, instead of being a single language, or have to be delivered in multiple languages, and also has to be edited to meet the various mores of the local territories. And each territory also typically may have some metadata requirements. So that's been also a fundamental shift. And so what this really has led is really an explosion in the number of content versions, right? I mean, it's not only one content version anymore, it's many, many versions over time of the same content. Again, to adapt to the multiple viewing experiences, right? Viewing something in Facebook on mute is very, very different than watching the same content in a living room in a home theater environment. And so component-based content was really a thing born out of the necessity to really try to tackle this explosion in content version and number of kinds of essence and kinds of metadata. And it's really not really rocket science, or it's really not, it's pretty simple compared to sending people to Mars. The idea is, instead of having a single linear media like we used to on tape, where there's a single video track and a single audio track, the idea is to have a more flexible framework where the same edit content can be associated with a growing number of tracks, audio tracks, subtitle tracks, access services tracks. And also, the idea is across multiple versions to reuse as much as possible some of the previous version assets, right? So there's no point in restriping the entire video if only one scene has changed. We'll talk about this in more detail. But so really, it's those really fundamental, I think, shift in entertainment content that's really been driving the need for component-based media, and some of the experiences that we'll see in a few minutes. And so, so that's a big change, right? That's a fundamental change from a simple tape, a videotape on a shelf, to a much more complex media asset management systems. And so what's the promise, right? Why are we doing all this? And at the end of the day, really, at the end of the road, there's a pot of gold, and it's really evergreen masters, right? So masters that can grow with time, as new technologies are brought in, or new languages, new edits are brought in. It's increased automation, and ultimately it should be really easy to create a particular version for a particular downstream distribution channel just with a click. In fact, automatically from an order. And it's also really lowering barriers to worldwide distribution, and also lowering barriers to worldwide acquisition on both sides. So that, I can watch my favorite French cooking show in the US. And so IMF, right? We have to talk a little bit about IMF. It's one of the formats, one of the technologies that I think makes possible component-based media, the management of component-based media. It's only one piece of the puzzle. There's an entire ecosystem. You might have heard on the consumer side of CMAF and some of the technologies being standardized by MPEG, and the work done by CTA Wave. And so IMF is really trying to tackle and help tackle the problem on the post-production mastering side. It's a worldwide standard developed by SMPTE. It was initially published in 2014. And I think we won't go into much detail. It's based on really boring established technologies, but it's bringing them together in a package that makes it possible to, again, tackle component-based media, makes it efficient to manage component-based media. Again, IMF is not completely monolithic. It has different flavors depending on the end application. The idea is those different flavors may introduce maybe 5-10% difference, and there's a common core. And so here are two examples, for instance, of two different applications of IMF for slightly different use cases, one based on JPEG 2000 and the other one based on ProRes. Question is, how do I get involved, right? So I've suddenly realized I have this component-based media thing that I have to deal with. How do I get to learn more about it? How do I get to influence the technology? And there's really multiple organizations worldwide that have been set up to deal with this. SMPTE is one, driving the standards. The EBU and the DPP are leading the charge in Europe. In North America, NEBA as well. And of course, the IMF user group, which is why we're here today, or what's motivating us being here. This is a user group of the HPA. And really, it's intended to be really a community of all users and implementers of IMF, but more broadly of component-based media. And it's really a place where folks can share experiences, come up with common best practices. There are 80 plus members, I think 90 by now, some very small, some very large, some multinationals to individual contributors. And it's under the umbrella of the Hollywood Professionals Association. So quarterly meetings for those interested, again, in trying to get into the community and be able to meet folks with the same issues and the same solutions. There's a website for all the details, and the next meeting actually is on Monday. So for anybody interested on this, please come and see me at the end, and I'll be able to provide pointers. But anyway, enough of me talking. Let's get to our panel today. So first, I think Lucas Carboni will be joining us. So Lucas is a senior. Yeah, please. I think that's how we're going to transition here. Yeah, it's a very subtle thing. Lucas is a senior vice president of media strategy at Fox Media Services.
Yep.
And he drives, I guess, the global best practices against on the global supply chain.
I thought you were going to say drives people crazy.
Drives people crazy,
yes.
All right. But particularly what I noticed is really an emphasis on trying to reduce digital waste, right?
Yes.
And so hopefully you can tell us more, and podium is
Believe
yours.
it or not, you can waste things with bits. So, hello. Thank you for the intro, Pierre. I'm Lucas Carboni from Fox Media Services. We're based on the 20th Century Fox studio lot. This kind of overview that I wanted to give today was really a little bit about why we're using components, but also getting into some of the challenges that we've discovered along the way to using components. They're not blockers, they're just things that need to be considered. So that's why we say we're all in on components. It's a case for components, but with some caveats. So just to give a little bit of context, in Global Media Services, our facility on the studio lot, we're the main media manufacturer for the studio. With some numbers there for 192,000 deliverables a year gives you a little bit of the sense of the scale that we're working with for just one facility. Producing that much content across 45 TV series and 20 features. And then we also have a metadata services group that is an adjunct of ours and manages 50,000 titles of content metadata across all languages. So one thing that's a little bit interesting is we have TV and feature content. We have 2,300 platform and broadcast customers, but we don't distinguish from a mastering or a manufacturing perspective between TV and feature content. It's all treated identically. From a technical perspective, it's obviously has its differences in content. And then, of course, we're in every country except North Korea, across 63 languages. So this is just some of the brands that we manufacture and service on the lot there. So there's two projects that we've had in the last 2 years that were big component-based projects. Obviously, IMF is one of them. We're big proponents of using IMF for component-based manufacturing. We use it for mastering and for servicing to customers. Again, it's a mixture of feature and TV content, HDR, SDR, lossless masters, compressed deliverables, and right now we're tipping at about 1 petabyte of IMF files, which is actually quite small compared to what it is we're storing. And that's a tribute to its componentized nature. And then the other was the Movies Anywhere project, where we had a back catalog of 1,300 features that got delivered in a componentized state, not IMF originally. This was all for HD launch. But as of this very week, we're delivering UHD IMFs to them. And this was also significant because this is the first time that IMF has been delivered with Movie Labs metadata as a way to wrap the package and distribute it. So we're very proud of that. And that was led by Al Rundle's team on the software development side. So we've been using IMFs, making components, and anybody that's doing post-production really has been making components for a long time anyways. We all know audio mixes and video edits happen in separate areas of the business. The files are moved around in a componentized way. But what was different was everything used to come together for a common format and distribution. Either put picture and sound on film or picture and sound on videotape or into a single file. So the newest thing really is that we're taking components and now distributing them. Component distribution is the change that it's really evolved over the last several years and been pulled along by our clients. So the customers that really demanded this were the global platforms. And this obviously helped ease their global expansion because they could reuse common elements and add a different subtitle or dubbed audio file and open up that content to a new market. So we had been dealing with that in sort of an ad hoc basis across a fractured landscape and everybody's different format, metadata wrapping and so on. And we knew wanted to adapt our distribution tools, but we really wanted to focus on standards and focus on open standards in a way that we could do something that was common and had a lot of consensus and a lot of buy-in from the marketplace. So we focused on IMF. And I don't know if anybody in this room is familiar with our product called FoxFast. This is our distribution hub for all customer deliverables where they can either log in or have their content auto-delivered to them. And we took a multi-year effort to adapt FoxFast for component distribution, but specifically IMF distribution. So actually, as of this week, we now have FoxFast with IMF deliveries for our customers worldwide, which is significant because that's a massive system that makes 3 million customer deliverables a year and connects to all the business systems upstream. So it's not an isolated thing. It wasn't a small undertaking, and shows the level of commitment that we're putting into it. So obviously it must be easy because manufacturing components and distributing them all seems to be done, but it's not. I'm going to speed through parts of this just because of those digital business systems at the top, right? The manufacturing and distribution in the middle. It's mostly what we focus on at trade shows like this, but those business systems that drive change or adaptation or rules inside that processing plant are really important and often overlooked. And really, for components to work well, we have to tie those all together. And one of the ways to look at it is making sure that across the different disciplines, you're making sure that the questions that those disciplines raise are answered in a way that doesn't add unnecessary complexity. So with standards, what is it made of? Specs, how is it customized? Rights, who can have it? Avails, when can they have it? Security, how is it protected? And metadata, how is it identified? Those questions all had to be answered with traditional media. Didn't matter if it was videotapes or XD-CAM files. But now with IMFs, it's a little bit more complicated because there is the ability to have interchangeability. So for an example, how do I fulfill an avail with complex IMF packages? Or how do I apply forensic watermarking without undoing the benefit of componentized video? Or how do I apply metadata to an asset that might belong to multiple versions when it's sitting in my asset repository? They're just questions that need to be approached and answered in a way to get the maximum supply chain benefit. But there's a huge benefit to the consistency of IMF. We get that technical framework that we love. Codecs and constraints are well documented, and we have a clear path towards next-gen distribution. But it doesn't solve every problem. So it doesn't eliminate inconsistency or just the differing ways that people would approach solving a particular problem. Like, what bit rate should I choose? How many languages go in one composition? Or should I even put a dub card in it? So quickly, just to run through an example of that, and I will speed this along. Just to highlight the dub card question, a dub card could be included in a composition, as expressed here, where the CPL controls the playback of the dub card. And from an authorization perspective and linear broadcast perspective, this is their preferred model. And another model, which works well for a global platform, would have that dub card externalized in a non-IMF format, perhaps a JPEG or MOV file, and controlled with an external metadata file. Two differing approaches, two different business reasons, same common format at the core of it. Another case is just graphic localization versus forced subtitles in an original video program. In this case, English. The original video track has that English text in it. If we were to graphically localize that text would change to the local language and would match the font and styling of the original production and look seamless to the video track and just handled with an insert. But that doesn't always play well at the majority of the global platforms where they would prefer a forced subtitle, which would just be handled with an external subtitle track. Again, part of the IMF package. And controlled by the CPL, synchronized with the CPL, and there's just a simple on-screen forced subtitle representing that event. So, with just a couple of examples of challenges that could be there, there's a couple things that I think we should be honest about, what slows us down when we're doing this kind of development, and especially at this scale and requiring this much precision. And not to be controversial, but standards slow us down because they take time and attention to fully understand them and work through all the interconnected, componentized documents, ironically, that have a lot of interplay. And so in order to develop good tools, you have to be really, really attentive to those standards, and small changes can make incompatibility and a lack of interoperability. Distraction, certainly, and sometimes we get a little bit excited about new formats and start imagining and projecting all the cool things we should do with them, but we lose a little bit of focus from the core original ideology. And we spend a lot of time with the vendors or the vendor manufacturers chasing those distractions as a way to satisfy their customers. The competing interests and format wars, not to name names, but if one brand of immersive audio versus another, and then that takes a long time to work itself out in the social life cycle, and then layers of complexity. Now that we have metadata on top of rights, on top of avails, on top of the media, things could tip over quickly. And we should also acknowledge what accelerates us, because there's way more of that, even though I've only listed one more that I'll go through. Because actually this brings us together to run a lot faster than I think we could have otherwise. And the number one thing is standards. Again, ironically, having them gives us the rules of the road and promotes interoperability. So without them, we would be struggling to work in a dynamic environment of numerous deliveries being incompatible. Having some focus, I'm sensing the mic dropping down. We're
accelerating.
Oh yeah, so the video, audio, and subtitles are taken care of before we get curious about all the other things. Some competition, so that we definitely have vendors and manufacturers competing with each other to make the best products that we can use. Simplicity, having simplistic solutions so that we're not over-engineering things, because they can definitely break. And then healthy debate. I think it's important that we all actually argue the different opinions out so that we can get to a common resolution and some consensus pretty quick. And those things are all happening through these types of forums and through SMPTE and HPA and the IMF user group. So it's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm only 2.5 minutes over. We're good.
All right. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Sam Johnson with Disney Distribution Operations EMEA.
Yep.
Where you manage the Disney Media Distribution platform, right, internationally?
Yeah, so we have Disney Media Distribution, which is kind of our sales side of things, but we've actually merged with our broadcast operations, so I kind of looking after a lot of the operations initiatives and distribution technologies for our theatrical distribution, our TV distribution as well.
And what, 1,300 titles?
There's a lot of titles. I don't have as much stats as I'm going to go into a bit more of a case study on kind of ABC. But yeah, thanks, Pierre.
Podium is yours.
Cheers, thank you. Okay. So, hello. So I'm Sam Johnson. I'm Senior Manager for Technology and Systems Distribution Operations at the Walt Disney Company. Today we're going to actually look at a bit of a case study that we've done with components, specifically from a kind of mezzanine level, and our ABC studios. But I've got a little bit of some stats that commercial actually wanted me to throw into the mix. So with ABC Studios, we're really pushing it in EMEA. We're live in 32 territories. We have 54 live services, equating to about 35 million subscribers. And this is across both linear and OTT. We had 1.4 million views in 2010 and around 800 million in 2017. And this year we're targeting 1 billion views for our ABC's Studios content. So a bit of background with our ABC workflows. So it's an ever-evolving distribution landscape for us, not only from our linear and OTT point of view, but from our own company's point of view. So we need to look at our standards. We have a multitude of different formats, very siloed organization. And we saw this as an opportunity to look at how we kind of remaster our mezzanine inventory. And with it, the benefits for reduction in storage space, I'm sure you guys already know this, and then the associated cost with it. But I think a big part of it for us is looking at the kind of lengthy post-production and vendor process for processing a lot of those multiple localized deliveries. And so therefore we want a really dynamic distribution framework from a mezzanine level. So a kind of a bit of a traditional kind of distribution framework that we have from a linear, and I've kind of stolen this from the theatrical group, so apologies. So you've got your DI process and then your localization process where we dub into 42 languages from a theatrical point of view, but up to 24 from a ABC's point of view. So moving along the lines of creating the individual components and then muxing them together and delivering those into those relevant clients as a single language master. We wanted to move to a kind of component-based inventory where we still have a very, without changing the workflow too much, so upstream it's still very similar, but then downstream on the actual distribution side, we want it to be much more dynamic. So again, looking at the benefits from Disney and an ABC point of view, looking at a kind of structured one master package for downstream distribution. So we're format agnostic going forward. Again, cost reduction for our inventory. And then the big part of it for us is we have every time that we seem to get a new client onboarded and we have to distribute content into them, we never amortize our inventory again. So we always just utilize that servicing master. So we saw this as an opportunity to really have a componentized framework up front so that we can utilize it downstream for linear, for OTT, for IMF, for a Movie Labs framework. It enables us for flexible versioning and mastering. So whether it's an IMF and delivering in a supplemental package, it gives us the option to do that as well. And a big part of it that a lot of people kind of forget is that it's not just a distribution framework. Again, we're a very siloed organization, and our asset inventory, it doesn't have true data governance. We've got our home end lot, we've got our theatrical group, we've got our ABC group, we've got our Disney Channel group. And this is an opportunity for us to truly have a conformed inventory as well. It will also enable us a bit of expedited servicing as well, of knowing that we have a truly conformed inventory. Like I said, we're kind of platform agnostic, so we have the ability to deliver in as IMF, Movie Labs, and then hopefully future adoption with some of our EMEA broadcasters as well. So again, a lot of it is driven by a lot of our deals, specifically our SVOD deals. We're basing our component-based mastering structure on our FIGS ABC schedules, delivering into some of our big globals like Amazon and Microsoft. And it's again being driven by a lot of the component requirements. Pierre and Lucas alluded to the fact that not a lot of our globals actually want to have that single language master framework. And therefore, we wanted to look at how we could do that for all new and returning library series. So a bit on the history of our components. We started off looking at a Disney mezzanine level for our ABC content, and then we're kind of working our way up to a thing that we called Project 16, where we looked at some of the title crossover across multiple of those deals, and then doing a remaster against those from an OV and then from a localized point of view. It'll also enable us, not only just for our current clients as well, but we were also future-facing as well, and we have a little app that's coming out next year, so we're just getting ready for that as well. So a little bit of the title crossover. So Project 16 was looked at. It's actually Project 18 now, but semantics. So we had Client A, Client B, say, where we've got distribution in France and Germany, say, and Spain and UK, but we saw there's an opportunity to remaster all that content. So that's 1,600 episodes, resulting in roughly 30,000 components. So again, we are, even though we're kind of distribution agnostic, we're looking at from, again, a mezzanine level. So in our inventory, we're actually we hold a texted master, program to program, or picture to picture, a semi-textless asset on alpha, where we're actually able just to mux it on top so we could distribute in a semi-textless master or a fully textless for those clients that are looking to take it. And then all the other localized assets as well against that. Okay. So what's kind of driving this is we're utilizing IDLE Level 2 as our primary kind of driver from our component package, and then utilizing an in-house house ID. And then also we're looking at how EMEA avails will also drive this for our distribution framework as well. We have a Disney UID as well that we register each component on. So each component is in our actual inventory and is logged, so that for whatever we need to utilize that for, whether it again be an IMF framework, we could do. Like I said, we're looking at a FIGS MVP for our mastering and trying to convince our commercial teams to do all the localization against that. It also enabled us we have a lot of regional groups as well. So mastering in a specific format or just being format agnostic allows us to have content in our media asset management system that, say, our India team could pull down, and they wouldn't need to necessarily have full experience or training up in IMF as well. We can either deliver it as a distributed component package, or we can actually have API hooks into our servicing systems for creation of any sort of master variants, whether, again, that be linear or OTT or D2C. So a little bit in summary, future state componentized assets will allow us full downstream distribution for all our types of our frameworks. It's all for all new and returning ABC shows. We've helped deliver a consistent master inventory and delivery framework that will benefit us in the long run. Thank you very much. Ooh, there we go. Little Mickey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hopefully not over time.
No, you were perfectly on time.
Cool. Good
a
stuff.
real inspiration for all of us, actually. So, Bill, you want to come in? Sure. So, Bill is the Senior Vice President of Technology, Production, and Post-Production at Sony Pictures.
I am.
And you've overseen quite a transition from tape-based to this component thing.
Yes, we have it, and it's been definitely a journey, and it's definitely been, I think, a real success at the studio, and how we've been able to embrace IMF and really kind of dig down and really make use of it. And I think the way that it was really intended. Not to say that others aren't, but the the issue is there are some real benefits when you truly embrace it as a format, as opposed to just having it as a delivery, having it as an output, which is possible too.
So you'll cover that. Great.
And I've got some updated stats I'll throw in here too. So pardon me if I have to refer to my phone here. But so this is a presentation that we've given at HPA and at NAB as well. So I'm rehashing it, but at the same time, I think it's really really goes to the core of what we've been after since we started this effort in 2012 with 4K. While the standards were still being developed, we were starting on a 4K initiative at the studio, and really in trying to handle 4K data for just even a small number of titles, it was really challenging. And not just how do we handle it on internal systems, handling 4K data on one system is fairly easy, but when you have to start throwing that around to your encode partners or to other parts of your facility, between storage systems, it becomes really challenging for repurposing. So just a little timeline, we had gone through our development with 4K and really latched on to IMF as something that would give us a benefit we felt down the road if we figured out a way to use it at that point. And 4K wasn't even part of the spec at the time. So we were really pushing the boundaries on what we could do, trying to see that there was some future benefit to all this work we were doing. But as we've gone through, we've been able to layer on these things like HDR, like immersive audio, like IMSC1. All these things have been additive as opposed to being, having to start over or create a whole new thing. So IMF servicing today, we've got about 10,000 CPLs across, it looks like, about 400 features of 400 different IMFs. We'll call them actual masters, actually unique titles. That some of those are HDR and SDR, some of those are SDR only, and so that's across 4K and HD as well. And then across television content or episodic content, we've got about 7,000 CPLs that are across about 1,500 episodes of episodic content. A big part of this too is, the size, being able to compress it, and as we've seen and we've talked about many times in the past, being able to reduce that package from the uncompressed data, or even from a ProRes. I would say our IMF packages with custom JPEG 2000 encoding parameters are half the size of a ProRes. And so having that as a really, a big driver for delivery over networks, being able to reduce not just storage on or your storage on a spinning disk or any other kind of MAM system, but over the pipe is really big, right? How can we get data to you faster? And that's to have something that's a smaller package that we can get to you. And components obviously reduce that even further, so you don't have to have multiple versions. Just on some numbers that look good in pie charts, but but it really is significant. This reduction in data is really significant. As has been mentioned, we started out with Netflix, delivering 4K to Netflix, and then Amazon, and we had our own Ultra service and Ultra HD Blu-ray, of course. But then it quickly led to this explosion of different options with 4K HDR, with now HLG coming on, Dolby Vision, Apple with iTunes, Vudu, all these different platforms made it seem more complex, but because we had a package that allowed us to add on different pieces, to add on Dolby Vision metadata, to add on other metadata, to add the immersive audio piece, that's been a real driver in how we've been able to manage our relationships with our partners. A few highlights on the way it works within the studio. We've got a lot of content throwing around in our global mastering and servicing group. So we've got a lot of materials across a lot of territories, a lot of versions going on, but the real heart of it is how do you integrate IMF not as a file format that you're holding onto, but how do you integrate it into your different systems? How do you integrate it with your internal MAM systems, which is really where I think it needs to go, because today, while we have these different workflows that show us we can move stuff around, people are still looking at a database entry like this, right? When they're looking up how do I check the avails on a title? What information do I have at my fingertips? And that's one view. But then an operator views that package, that same thing, that CPL that's being referenced from the searching standpoint, an operator sees a CPL in this way. So there's got to be, we got to get to the next level, which is how do we start to create all of this content, put it in a system that actually is IMF aware and becomes really part of the servicing element in and of itself, not just how do I deliver a CPL, but how do I link all those assets together, which is really the power of IMF and the component-based nature to begin with. So all these, I'll skip all these so we can get to questions. These are much less interesting in that regard. There you go. Gives you some time back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so next up is Usman Shakil, who's technical lead at Amazon Web Services. You might have heard that Amazon Web Services, small company. And you've been helping set up workflows for some of the folks maybe that are on the panel today or in the room.
Yes, absolutely.
So you want to tell us more about it?
Yes.
The name is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about component-based media and entertainment workflows powered by AWS. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a step back and talk about the whole IMF and componentized workflows from a solutioning architecture perspective, right? What are some of the opportunities that are there that cloud really brings to the table from a perspective of implementation as well as the underlying infrastructure services. So talking about the problem itself, and the folks prior to me have already discussed it in a lot of detail, so I don't really need to go in depth. But really, the idea is that you want to store your content once and you want to deliver it multiple times. And that's where, as you will see while I talk about some of the concepts here, some of the architectural patterns like the idea of content lakes comes very clear. The idea of serverless compute becomes very clear, right? That all of those things can be leveraged very effectively towards the benefit of or application of storing once and delivering multiple times. So some of the features here, very high level. On the cloud storage side, what you're going to see is that, if you're looking at your content, your archive, whether that is, say, your archive, your distribution archive, as the whole idea of content lakes, then it doesn't matter, like, what is the underlying application of it. Right? The content is available to you very readily, along with all the different components within the same system. And if you have a unified search capability and your processing rightly available on top of it, then that becomes very, very efficient. Metadata management and tagging is a key area where we talk to a lot of different customers across the whole media supply chain space, where what we are doing on AWS side is giving you specific features to make this easier and easier upon yourself. So, for example, things like tagging capability, where you can define certain relationships between different components of the underlying package, right? Is one capability where you can change those relationships or add additional metadata as the time goes, or as you have additional formats that you want to deliver, etc. On the compute side, all about commodity computing, right? So the whole idea of file-based workflows, why do you have to have an infrastructure running all the time? If you can have it based on a specific transaction, which is a specific component of a package, then this entire thing can be run as a serverless way, where it's highly efficient, very cost effective for you. And on top of that, you're not really tied to a specific type of compute, right? We're going to talk about JPEG 2000 or other formats where different formats require different compute. Some of the stuff which requires high compute or high memory or high GPU type of or GPU type of capabilities, right? You can really leverage very specific to the component-based transaction or the process that you want to run. The workflow management is an important component, right? Like, how do you create serverless design patterns and component-based work functions, and then fully managed services. So more and more what we're doing is, as you might have noticed, that we're going up the stack now, right? So it's not all about just, say, storage or just about compute, right? Rather, how can we bring more relevant services to you? An example being AWS Elemental Media Services, right? So you want to create your IMF package, you want to run your transcodes right from there. Why do you have to have a transcoding fleet running all the time 24/7? Rather, just do it on a file-based basis, and it's basically per job, per transcode, etc., going through it. So IMF is the solution, as people talked about. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but I'll kind of give you a couple of examples here, where we are looking at defining these architectural patterns really more and more deep into the component-based systems. So one of the examples there is the whole idea of component-based asset management. So this is more like a solution that our solution architecture team has built, kind of using the different components from AWS and tying them together to kind of give you this a serverless-based system, where the different files or different aspects of the package coming in, and as they pass through this entire workflow, what you will see is that individual components or individual tasks within the supply chain workflow are being triggered by step functions or lambda type of functions, which are transactional function and can trigger higher compute or higher value functions for that particular media asset. This is an example of component-based supply chain, and this is a very high-level concept here, but what you will see is that underneath, it is being leveraged by some of the folks here on the panel, also other customers that are listed on the right side of the slide. I'd like to dive deep, kind of one layer down on a couple of customer examples. So I took the liberty of taking Turner supply chain. This is actually a slide from their presentation last year at our annual conference, where Michael Cutter from Turner actually talked about how they took their entire supply chain and componentized it using serverless functions, right? So basically, you have your distribution master that is sitting in the cloud, and then you have your transcode, atomize, and QC, all those functions running as serverless functions, and that generate your IMF library master, right? And that's where your scaled storage in the cloud becomes very important. And then once you receive those orders, right, every single thing is, again, even from the top layer, sort of say your UI to order receipt is also serverless, right? That has the entire API gateway running in front of these Lambda functions. So every single time a request comes in or an order comes in, it is really underneath. It's a Lambda function that is triggering a supply chain function, again, using these serverless components. The last example I have is with own zones. Again, a very similar kind of a concept where you have your content library sitting on S3, and the entire workflow is transactional based, file based as it comes in, using different serverless functions, and they are actually using elemental media services there to actually do the transcoding of the underlying assets there. So I'll leave it at that, but I guess the macro point that I see more and more talking with the different media companies is that the whole concept of supply chains is kind of converging into one. Right? You see different broadcasters, production companies, now streaming OTT vendors, like everybody looking at these supply chains in these more modern type of architectures, right? And from a broadcast perspective, well, broadcast is kind of like an old school business, but how do you merge this supply chain into the digital equation as well? And the way you do that is through componentization and using these modernized architectures on the cloud. Well, thank you very much, and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So next up is Chris Fetner. So Chris, do you want to come here? So Director, Post Partnership and
Integration at
Netflix.
Yes.
So you help folks with content providers and...
Yeah, so my job is really to optimize the ecosystem for upstream delivery to Netflix.
Right. And you've been busy before that, PBS, Discovery, BBC America.
That's right. I've been very lucky to work for a lot of great places.
So podium is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I realize that I'm 40 minutes into this, so I'll try to be A, brief, and B, interesting. So bear with me. And I also think it's a little ironic that we're wearing these headphones and doing a IMF song and dance. So anyways, Netflix's North Star really is to spread joy with our content globally. So we're in 190 countries in 27 languages, and that continues to grow every year. And so we got involved with IMF a long time ago, probably 2013, as did Bill over at Sony, because we realized that as our business aspirations grew globally, that master format would really serve us best and would reduce storage requirements and things like that. So we've been at IMF for a long time. It's been a privilege to work with all the standards bodies and all the manufacturers to continue to seed the concept of IMF and to work with them as it continues to mature. So today, about 90% of Netflix deliveries, original deliveries, come in on IMF. We take deliveries from all of the little film strips on this map, so you can see that it's a fairly global distribution. It's, Netflix, one of Netflix's most popular shows was developed by a 100-year-old French company. It's about the South American drug trade, and it's hugely popular in Germany. So that is really a global platform by our standards. And so we continue to find great stories wherever they may be and to try to make sure that they can be delivered at scale and high quality to Netflix subscribers. So one of the things that we like about IMF is the metadata aspect of it. It allows us to do quite a lot of interesting things on the supply chain, including validation. We have a tool called Photon, which interrogates the essence of the files and lets us know whether or not it's as expected. That's an open source tool that's actually integrated in lots of other manufacturers' tools. But for us, that's been a really important thing, is all of the back office things, the behind the curtain, under the hood, however you want to characterize them. Things like mapping language assets to the master files so that we can at scale transcode them and make them available. So that's a really big part of the work that we do. The other big thing for us is fixes. One of the things that's challenging is because we release all of our material at one time typically, when there's problems, especially with 4K files, just the transient movement of that data can be cumbersome. And so IMF has allowed us to adopt a workflow where, for in this case, we have a dead pixel. Before we would have had to take an entire delivery of that video file, and now we can just take the affected frames. And so it's really allowed us to achieve our goals around fast delivery at high quality. And it just wouldn't be possible without this kind of component-based delivery. Another thing is obviously we have lots of versions. Sometimes those versions can be relatively small changes, and sometimes they can be very dramatic. So, we always obviously start off with this original version. In this case, it's an English language version of Stranger Things. But we might also have this version, which is the Japanese version. So obviously we leverage all of the things that are the same. We keep those so that we can maintain a relatively modest footprint in our AWS instance. And then we also have that version, the differences, so that we can make it available to the market that we're servicing. So again, this has just been very critical to our business. Without it, we would have a tough time. We would keep versions, especially since most of our titles are actually in 4K these days and in HDR. So we would really be holding quite a lot of data in the cloud just to service every market that we have our business in. We have some general philosophies around IMF and why we like it. So one of the things is we believe heavily in open standards. You see that in all parts of our business. We have Chaos Monkey, which is a tool for checking the status of AWS. I see Usman nodding his head, right? So we have Spinnaker, which is also another tool that's used. It's an open source tool that we use for spinning up instances of AWS. These are all tools and innovations that we've developed specifically for cloud computing, but we actually take that same philosophy and we apply it to all aspects of our business. And so we just believe very much in that. We believe in interoperability and enabling that. So we spend a lot of time participating in the plug fests, working with manufacturers, and really ensuring that there is truly interoperability. And we actually believe that it should be widely available. So that means that having lots of different tools and letting the market mature so that there's lots of ways to make IMF. And we continue to see a lot of progress in that space. I think that one manufacturer just came up with a $500 version of IMF creation. So very far away from where it started a few years ago. And of course, we do believe that encouraging competition is best for the market. We also believe that IMF really future-proofs your assets so that it allows you to have something, as Bill alluded to, that you can continue to build on, which is really an important thing for us. And we continue to support SMPTE, and we work a lot with the SMPTE to continue to evolve the standard, as well as work with the IMF users group. So those are all really important things to us as a business, and we continue to invest in them. The other thing that we do is we have this partner ecosystem. So on the left, you'll see the post-partner program. That's a relatively new program started this summer. That's really to work with facilities that are creating content for Netflix and to make sure that they understand all the things around our standards, not just IMF, but that they are able to meet our standards, meet our master delivery specifications. So that's one group working with the working with the facilities. And on the other side is a program that just launched yesterday, and that's the Post Technology Alliance. And that's really to work with manufacturers of equipment to make sure that that their products meet our standards today and will continue to meet them in the future. So we work a lot with their roadmap and our roadmap, and try to share with them the context to continue to evolve their product. And a big part of that is IMF. And the one thing I just want to say, a little asterisk, is it's very important to Netflix that we have just a vanilla. We don't want a Netflix version. We want just an IMF that everybody else can also adopt. So we just feel like that scales better than if somebody has to make something that's bespoke for just us as a platform. So that's really all the work that Netflix does in IMF. We've continued to support it for a long time, and we still feel like it's a great solution for us and for our business, but also for businesses that share similar complexities. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. So I think thank you very much all for staying on time, mostly.
Mostly.
So we're going to move to Q&A. Again, don't hesitate to use Slido or through the IBC app or directly at slido.com, hashtag IBC 2018. Again, we're going to take questions from the room, but for some folks may feel more comfortable asking them online, please do so, and I'll look both in the room and also online for those questions. So maybe starting with the room, any questions? Please don't be shy. This is your opportunity. You've flown 5,000 miles for this. All right, so maybe I'll start with one. So something that I never thought I'd ever hear myself say is just, 5 years ago, the idea of doing mastering in the cloud was, I think, completely, heretic, in fact, right? So putting the crown jewels somewhere online and processing them online.
Right.
So what's changed? I mean,
The cost went down
Yeah.
and the threat level receded.
is that? So the threat level, you mean there's...
Perceived threat level
I see.
Yeah.
at the executive level. No, it can't be there. I don't trust it there. And then we said, but our own data center is there, not cloud, but our own facility somewhere else. So I think once we contextualized it a little bit, it became more familiar and less scary.
I think
My perspective.
cost is a big driver. Working in operations, you need to convince senior stakeholders that there is an ROI for any initiative that you try and do, and there being a cost benefit to that. And then I think it is a perceived security threat. That said, we still have a lot of pre-release content that's on-prem. So, and I think that's just the way it's going to have to be.
I think the perceived security threat is something that for traditional media companies, it's something that we've been aware of. It's been coming, but at the same time, we use it in certain parts of our organization, but not in others.
Yeah.
So putting large assets up was perceived to be cost prohibitive because we didn't have these technologies at the time too. So I think that's why 5 years ago, putting up large scale assets was much more challenging.
I think as well in terms of scale and in terms of you don't have to spin up new on-prem storage. You can be agile and spinning up new instances depending on the different types of projects as well. So I think that's been a big benefit to us.
So Netflix has been on the cloud since the beginning, right?
Yeah, we've been on the cloud for a long time. Fully on the cloud about 6 years. But we've been comfortable with it for a long time. We've worked very closely with AWS over the years. And I think that it is cost. I also think the elasticity is a big thing, because businesses tend to be a little lumpy. And so rather than build an on-prem facility that's busy 80% of the time, you can actually get to a place where you're very, very efficient and you're only really using what you need when you need it. And I think that's very good for businesses. And I also think just in general, people are getting more comfortable with the cloud. Everybody is exposed to everything in the cloud now. And so I think that it's just, society has become more comfortable with the cloud.
I would just add, all the stuff plus one additional thing in there. That's really the evolution of the platform itself. I mean, you look at where we were 5 years ago versus where we are now. I mean, with respect to the feature set, there's a whole lot, and we see that like on a day-to-day basis at AWS. We work very closely with all our customers and get their feedback. Just to kind of give you a few examples, like if you look at even from a storage perspective, I mean, back then was there is one S3, right? And now we have how many tiers of S3, like really custom built for specific tasks, specific workflow requirements, right? We also see evolution of these architectures, like the whole serverless concept and how it could be all transactional, again, making it even better from a cost perspective for our customers. Security is another big one, right? We constantly keep working on additional features that control set for our customers to make it worth their while. So,
And just to clarify my answer, we are not mastering in the cloud. We still can't put objects over 5 terabytes into AWS, and the efficiency of dealing with image-based sequences is still prohibitive from a transport mechanism.
So color correction happens on-prem.
Yeah, those truly heavy operations are still on-prem, but from a storage or distribution perspective, or what we call servicing, so still large objects, they might be made or produced or manipulated cloud side.
What about QC?
Yeah, that's coming up. We're not doing it practically, but definitely exploring. There's a lot of, especially with IMF, I don't know what your experiences are, but Fox is a little bit unique because we make lossless masters and then compressed deliverables still in IMF, but it's a child of that parent. Where I know is others have chosen to just pick an IMF application and a bit rate and go with it. So QCing that 16-bit lossless master, early days was challenging on a lot of devices. So we couldn't get real-time playback. So the solution was to QC by proxy, make a lower, not resolution, but lower bit rate generation from it, and that lends itself to cloud playback much better.
I think we've had experiences where we're delivering into, say, an AWS sandbox for QC validation, and it allows anyone in the world following the sun through across all our territories to do a QC pass. So you're not just tied to your actual your LAN or your DGN. So that's been a big benefit for us from a QC standpoint.
But we're still doing a lot of human QC as well, because to the topic here, componentized packages, unless they are something standardized like an IMF, don't have natural QC commercial players that just naturally support them readily, or with all the features that you would want. There might be parts of it that are handled, but not others. IMF has actually helped that. I can take a composition, open it up on multiple devices the same way. So that's helped.
Maybe moving on to a different topic. So question that came online here. So we've talked a lot, I mean, so historically IMF started with motion picture, right? Or certainly folks that were more involved in the motion picture side of things. But, you know, now it's being distributed to downstream customers that are much more TV based.
Yep.
And particularly, Bill, you mentioned delivering maybe ultimately perhaps to more traditional broadcast customers?
Which we are delivering to several broadcast customers now, and I would imagine most everybody is. That is where the adoption is really going to help, right? Is when broadcasters pick up on IMF and actually understand it, embrace it, and the whole ecosystem gets much more efficient with that streamlined delivery pipeline. But you know, that's still going to take time, because just as it's taken us a while to embrace the cloud and it's taken us time to put these things in place, you know, broadcasters have to go through their own sort of processing of moving from whatever media format they're asking for on delivery to, you know, IMF, and understanding how components will actually help them in their business.
A lot of the broadcasters are going global as well. You take Sky as for instance, potentially looking to consolidate their base across Deutschland, UK, and Italy. That's a big drive.
I don't think we're allowed to talk about that.
Okay.
But the broadcasters that are going global, are going multiple territories.
Yeah, multiple territories, kind of across the board. There, I think that's going to be a big driver for it. But I think as well, UHD deliverables as well into those partners. I think that's going to be a huge driver for them, because traditionally linear broadcasters they don't. They just like to take like a flat language master, and that's what they're used to.
They have multiple outlets now. It's the OTT service that complements their linear distribution. And so they also have different experiential needs. They need to produce one experience for a flattened linear playback and another experience to offer their streaming customers. Sometimes it's the same subscriber, but the usual case there is the one that I highlighted about subtitles. We're much more familiar in a streaming scenario to be able to toggle subtitles on and off, accompanying various dubbed audio tracks. That just might not be you support it on the broadcast side as readily. So they often need some componentized delivery to help facilitate both processing.
So it's not a technology obstacle, really.
Oh, it is. It's not been easy to get the systems buy-in that's necessary to start playing in the world of IMF because it is a systems changeover for them. But a conceptual buy-in, they started to understand it as soon as they went deep in their distribution stack.
I guess that's the thing. It's not necessarily a technology hurdle, but there is a cost.
Yeah.
There's a cost to implement because the technologies are available.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, so another question that was on the list is, what about onboarding, right? So you speak about bringing people up to speed. So any experience, any words of wisdom about onboarding folks with something that's really new? Like
Yeah, I mean, Netflix has invested heavily in that, right? Because when we first, with the exception of Bill at Sony and a few other isolated places, there really weren't a lot of people that were familiar with how to create them well, and there was still interoperability challenges and everything else. And so, we had to invest heavily in training and onboarding. We have a whole team that still today test every facility that is going to be in our ecosystem to make sure that they can actually deliver a test package. We even had to go so far as to create test material that could be put in an IMF, that was not encumbered by rights issues or anything like that. And so, we really did have to invest heavily in it in order to make it successful. And we did videos, and we did worked with all the manufacturers to kind of have set training plans and things like that. And so, and I think that it's ongoing because it's an evolving thing. And so we continue to, have to look at the material we have and say, is this still relevant? Is it still current? Or do we have to go out and do it all over again? So it's ongoing. And I think that every time there's a new implementation or use for IMF, it's going to require the main incumbent in that space to carry some water around training.
We spend quite a bit of time working with onboarding to entice broadcasters, for instance, to accept IMF as the delivery as opposed to whatever standard they had already been requesting. So it is a process because there's an education that needs to happen because not everybody's necessarily aware. And so it's how do you help people along to understand how it could benefit them? And if it doesn't, then they stick with whatever they were originally planning with.
And the facilities as well, like we'll get little surprises. Like last year, we were working on making one or two of our FX series produced in HDR. And once we kind of went through the process with the network, they came back and said, you know what, we'll do all 19 series. And the season started in 3 weeks. So it was like, okay, well, where are they all being produced? Because every TV show will have its favorite post facility. So we had to rapidly go out, and some were familiar, but they were doing it for other partners. So it's now, here's, the way we need it formatted for us. And so little exercises like that have definitely been bursts of activity out on the street that have raised awareness and consistency.
And I guess I'll just add on our side, we're investing quite a bit in implementation, so like sample implementations of these things. So, I mean, as you'll know, there's a lot of different building blocks, right, on the AWS platform. But then how do you kind of tie it all together to give you those sample sort of implementations that somebody could start with as sort of like, say, either a POC or kind of like an example, right? So we've taken this model of solutions or templated solutions in that space where users can come in and now have an entire sort of template that sets up that environment for them in the cloud. So.
Okay, thank you. So before, we have actually a lot of questions online, which is amazing. But so before I go to some more in depth, any questions in the room? Yes.
How do you deal with the back catalog of assets that are
I think the microphone is coming for you. So.
Thanks. So I'm Sebastian from Red Bull. How did or do you deal with a huge back catalog of traditional essences, let's say in different languages, all the movies, and transferring them to a component-based standard? Because I think convincing senior management to lay out the money to make that transition could be a huge issue, I guess.
Yeah, just speaking for ourselves, we've always done components in HD, but in proprietary format, servicing the iTunes of the world or Netflix or Amazon. For us to revisit and put things into a standardized component state, it was always as a part of a deal. We use the deal to fund the activity. So whether it's Movies Anywhere or it's, you know, an upcoming deal with Canal or something, we're using that to just revisit those titles and produce them.
That's exactly the same framework that we're taking for that. And then the re-amortization of those assets once that deal is done, so you don't have to utilize additional vendor costs to remaster that content again and again and again.
Same for us.
The other thing I'll note is we've really enticed people to take the materials formatted in IMF, because then we actually have no materials fee. If they're willing to accept our format, it is free to them. They pay the license, of course, to have the content. But it's not like the old days of tape distribution where we said the show is licensed for $1,000. Oh, and it cost you $800 extra to make an HD cam tape for you. Nope, it's free. If you take what we have, it's free to you.
We try to use those carrots too.
All right, so looking at the questions online, the one with the most thumbs up, it's the 21st century.
Yeah, really.
I think we should live it.
Is it the
But
three
actually-
people laughing over there?
I know. It's,
You don't have to raise your hand anymore.
that may be 3 people that work for you.
I think I've got some hecklers in the audience.
No, actually, it's,
now they're online heckling. Say that.
it's actually a good question. So that's a recurring one, is IMF as an archive format.
Yep.
And so I think there's a question itself, and of course, what does archive mean? So maybe we should take it. So what does it mean for you?
Well, for us, archive is the long-term storage and infrequent reuse. So that's our lossless, more heavyweight masters. When that title's current, you use it frequently, make a bunch of derivatives, but generally it's stored and infrequently accessed. And all of our other renditions that are downstream of that are considered servicing or distribution.
And so for that, you use something that can be turned into IMF or can be accessed?
We use IMF itself.
Oh.
So yeah, 16-bit lossless on the HDR. We wanted 16-bit lossless on the Rec 709, but there's a little oversight in the standards. And so it's 10-bit currently, but yeah, we're hoping to complete that matrix to 16-bit. And that really eliminates the DPX sequences that were just clogging up LTO libraries.
It's very similar. We just haven't moved there yet from a kind of archiving format, but we're just utilizing IMF as a distribution framework.
So for distribution mezzanine, essentially.
Yeah, distribution mezzanine. So again, we have a deep level archive where we have uncompressed frame-based assets, and then we have a servicing level master, and that's the mezzanine package that we're looking to utilize from a component point of view. But again, from a different mezzanine level up, format agnostic.
For us, these are servicing masters, and because this actually leads into some of the new applications that are going on with App 4 and App 5 in cinema mastering as well as ACEs, we're certainly looking at how we would use this as a true archive as opposed to looking at the archive of the original source files, not the final output, which would be in PQ 2084 version or a Rec 709 version. So we see this all, even the 16-bit version, that's all just a servicing element. So I think we'll get to the point where we will be archiving in IMF or an IMF-like structure, because we can bring all those components together just the same as we're doing on the servicing side in order to manage the archive library better. I mean, these are assets that go into the library as well, but really true archive, being able to pull out and repurpose for some other format is really the goal of an archive. Yeah. So we'll get there.
I would say that, ironically, we don't service any other customers, but we actually do treat it very much the same way. So it is our mezzanine file from which we then put that into our, transcoding engines and everything else and create all of the derivatives. So for archival reasons, we keep pretty much everything that everybody else is keeping in terms of all of the original picture and sound assets, because we really can't predict what will be on our service, what the service will be offering in the next few years. And so we want to continue to have a maximum flexibility with being able to remaster to some new experience. And so for us, we just use the IMFs for sort of the downstream processes that happen.
And we'll be interested, like Bill mentioned, in App 4 for Cinema Mezzanine, because everything I was describing is the non-theatrical elements.
So going back to something that was mentioned a little bit earlier in passing, so in terms of cloud, IMF in the cloud, and dealing with archives, which are much larger files, right? Even if they're losslessly compressed, are there any limits there, or?
5 terabytes per object.
Yeah, so per object in the object store, the maximum you can store today per object is 5 terabytes, right? So now we have cases where customers have started looking into, we're looking into kind of like, say, how we kind of increase that limit, right? There shouldn't really be a limit, because if you look at it, the object store itself, there is no limit with respect to the number of objects. It's just the size per object, right? But then there are mechanisms where people have started looking into the parts, part-based storage. So you could, if you can store an object in multiple different components itself within an object store, but then that increases an additional layer of complexity, right? Now, how are you going to take that, like say there's 50 different components of that, and then tie those back together? And the kind of say overall high level itself is complex at the moment, right? But
which is the same as the workaround, because like the obvious workaround is if you have a 5 terabyte video file, break it into reels.
Yep.
But to your point, it adds needless complexity to the recomposition. So the same would be true on the technical level at the low end, reconstituting the bits to add another layer of complexity to it.
And the one challenge around that too is you don't have to do it for your smaller assets. So your servicing assets don't have that. And so to create real compatibility between your archive assets and your servicing assets, you want parity on this MXF track file is the same as basically this is the child of that parent, and that parent shouldn't have to be necessarily broken into multiple pieces.
Just to accommodate.
Just to accommodate a sort of arbitrary limitation.
Any questions in the room on archive before we dig even deeper?
Going deep.
And we're going deep on the next one here, but it has 2 thumbs up.
Okay.
So talked a little bit about, you mentioned multiple applications and mentioned it also earlier. And so I think the question is, so how many application is too many applications, right? When is too many codecs too many codecs? So
Think about now. I really kind of liked it when it was JPEG 2000 only, because it gave us some focus. That's just my preference. If you're going to take the effort to wrap ProRes into IMF, the transwrap effort and rewriting the data now is basically the same as retranscoding it anyways. Might as well just keep it common. That's my perspective.
Yeah, at some point it's like one is nice, and some people think more is better, but the reality is that, the simplicity, I think when we originally came to this, it was like, oh, it's going to be this really simple thing. But understanding the other perspectives, if it brings people into the IMF ecosystem, I think over time that's something that can hopefully settle out, and what maybe there's 1 or 2 that are the predominant ones that are used.
As long as it doesn't drive a lack of interoperability over time.
Right, and that's
if
that's
you bring in
the
a bunch
challenge.
of people quickly and you go, yay, we're all in the same framework, but wait, I can't interchange with you
Yeah,
because we're using different transcoders, and that's the part that ends up with just fractured disruption, because we
then
get to
you get-
choose our codecs on an HDCAM SR tape. It's a
Right,
Big 4
no.
Studio profile, and you get to choose the standard you wrote the video in. That was about it.
Right.
I would say that we were very happy with one, but I also do understand there's other applications and other uses. I mean, I think that there's, 2 sides to this. So to Lucas's point, that this was nice when it was focused and everybody was trying to, working with the same set of parameters and guidelines to try to get to, and we made a lot of headway very rapidly, I think, because that was not a big source of debate. But I also think that there's no harm in having them spelled out as applications, because it's better than people having them become organic, kind of cropped up implementation. So I actually still am a fan of having them spelled out, and letting the market decide. But we, again, are very happy with an open standard that, is pretty hardy and well established. So.
Open is nice. But also from our perspective, we have to support all the post, I mean, just like you guys do as well with the partner program and you built, like it's in the post community, there's a variety of vendors that support IMF on the mastering tools and things. And when we have them chasing other customer sets, again, that's okay, that's part of the marketplace, but they then have to do so much regression testing with changes that may not yield any benefit to the core community. And it just ends up being a little bit distracting. So I do think it's good overall. It's much better having it defined in an application. That is true.
Yeah. So going back to QC, does that have any impact on QC? Purely the technical variations?
Mostly just in the tools themselves that we found is just sometimes it's like, oh, we're going to get an update. Oh, no, I didn't get you that update because I was busy doing something else that it's in the family, but it's a second cousin.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, look, everybody has limitations, hard limitations on engineering resources and bandwidth, and so obviously, when there's more variation, you're competing with the same set of resources. I don't think any manufacturer can go out and say, okay, we're going to hire 5 more dev engineers because now there's some other format or some other application, and so I do think that you're just stressing the system typically, unless the only way they can do that is if there's truly a real market and a real return on investment, in which case they can do it. But when it's chasing something that may or may not have any actual utility in the industry, that's a distraction.
So one last question from the room, maybe? Don't be shy. Last opportunity. All right, so I have one more question online here before we do a little wrap up. So going back to QC of component-based media. So what's the level of comfort with, if you've already done QC, let's say, of a complete composition that includes, let's say, French dubs and subs, English original language, and English video edit, and now you add a new language. Do you have to redo QC of the entire composition? Do you do QC only of the added language, or how?
Yeah, the QC of the additional components that changed. One thing we love about IMF is it's very prescriptive and self-declaring, and so it declares its SHA-1 hash value inside the CPL, and that can all be readily validated. So we have comfort knowing that something didn't fundamentally change in the bits if we just run an automated QC exercise on the entirety of the package. But typically we're just QCing the delta.
I think that the challenge that we'll potentially see, say, within the UK broadcasters, is if you do a supplemental package and you're actually doing some dynamic insertion, is that you'll probably have to run it through the PSC or Harding again. So that I think that's going to be a constraint that we're going to have to come up against. But that's the main constraint against the supplemental that I see.
I mean, that's been one of the biggest benefits of going to a component-based model, is our ability to not have to QC those things that we've already QC'd. I mean, it's, we've talked about this, I think, a lot in the past, and it feels sort of like it's a standard operating procedure for us, and maybe it gets a little overlooked, but it's a huge, huge win for anybody who's adopting IMF. Is you finally realize the amount of time you spend QCing goes way, way down. And it's not because you feel comfortable with it. It truly is, you just be re-QCing something you've already QC'd. So once everything's lined up and everyone has maybe a little bit of a different way that they create their packages, but we started out from the very beginning with a very sort of rigid model of very well-defined head and tail leaders with sync pops as well. So all audios conform to it's not a 2-pop, it's a 10-pop at the head, but everything has that pop in it, so that we know in the file-based world that at least the sync that was agreed to on the day is at least still the sync that we can guarantee down the road, not just from a hash value perspective, but if somebody wants to question it, you can just visually verify that things are still in sync.
Yeah, I would say the same. We don't QC things twice. We QC the differences. So.
All right, maybe just one last round. If you had one words of wisdom for people taking on component-based media and IMF, what would it be?
Get involved. I mean, like, these forums are awesome, but definitely sometimes we get together and it's surprising how small the room is. And I think for something that's so foundationally, changing the way that we manufacture and distribute, or even if we were manufacturing that way before, certainly distributing, it takes involvement and just attention to detail, because there's a lot of details.
Yeah.
I think really trying to get in front of those senior stakeholders, really trying to put your case forward. I think components is here to stay, and it will be it's not even the future, it is what it is today. So you're just I think going in front of those senior stakeholders, getting them more aware of what the benefits it can bring, working with some of the alliances that are out there, being a part of it, as Lucas said, being part of the conversation, helping drive the actual formats and standards. The more the merrier in the industry, I think.
Yeah, I think that if you can see a benefit in your organization of implementing IMF, whatever you're assuming those benefits would be now, they're actually going to be much greater. And it's sometimes hard to quantify that when you are going to the executives and the various stakeholders within an organization. But the reality is that it's sort of like once you start to implement a component-based workflow and IMF specifically, you're starting down a path of a whole cascade of benefits to your organization. And that sometimes is a hard sell as well, because there's no direct monetary benefit today. I mean, you'll find that piece that is beneficial, but it's hard to sell the future, but those benefits will come as well. Additional benefits will come as well.
I would say, there's obviously a lot of benefits, and we see this trend across multiple different customers that are using AWS as a platform. For us, really, feedback is important. So we'd love to hear what can we do on our services perspective to make it easier for you for you to be able to adopt these kind of package-based workflows that are efficient for your business.
I would say that the two vectors of sort of globalization, so really platforms becoming truly global, and the other vector sort of just the rapid innovation of viewing experience, that if you're really trying to align your business with those two vectors, that you really can't do that reasonably without a component-based library and component-based delivery, because you'll just end up keeping hundreds of thousands of the same version, and so it's just untenable. So I would say that really probably everybody has aspirations to either to be more global or to be really in sync with rapidly evolving viewer consumption experiences. So you almost kind of have to do IMF. I'll throw the gauntlet down and say it's hard to not do it. So.
Well, thank you very much, and a good round of applause for our speakers today. And, thank you very much all for joining us, and again, have a great IBC, and we'll see all of you soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.